right, welcome everybody. Thank you for joining this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Ethan Soloviev. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at HowGood, and welcome to another one of HowGood's webinar series. Today, we are focusing on operationalizing regenerative agriculture, how to align to corporate goals and scale action. I'll do a few logistical notes while folks join, and then we will kick things off. HowGood webinars are community events. We love to hear from you. We love to hear questions. There's a chat where you can put your questions throughout. Sometimes you'll get responses in the chat. A little later, near the end of the webinar, I will moderate and pull a few of the top questions from there to offer to the speakers. But please feel free to engage with each other. You're even welcome to hop in the chat right now and say who you are, where you're coming from. Also, you're welcome to have your video on. Some people do that, some people don't. All the speakers will have their video on the whole time, so you are welcome to as well. And it's a great honor and pleasure to co-host this webinar today with WBCSD, the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, and OP2B, the One Planet Business for Biodiversity Coalition. And we have Stefania Avanzini, who will be one of the speakers today, representing WBCSD and OP2B. I'll make a few other notes before we get going. We've got 100, we just broke 175 people on this webinar. This webinar had over 700 people sign up for it. And those people represented 426 different organizations. So this is a topic of incredible importance to the world. And it's an incredible moment to be engaging in it. And so thank you and all of your organizations for coming and for thinking about how we can push regenerative agriculture forward. Here's the speakers we've got today. As mentioned before, I'm Ethan Soloviev, Chief Innovation Officer at HowGood. We have Stefania Avanzini, Agriculture and Food Director at WBCSD. Daniel Glas is joining us from Bayer, Paul Scheetz from ADM, and Rafael Elizondo from Ikea. We will hear from all of them in the course of our conversation today. Before I hand over to Stefania, I'm going to make just a few notes about why this is important. And really, part of what we're doing here is moving from theory into practice on regenerative agriculture metrics. I've been working on regenerative agriculture I ran a first set of courses in 2009. So that's much longer than the sort of current bustle around it. And over the course of the last decade and a half, there's been a number of arguments and challenges within the broader regenerative agriculture community. Some of them have focused around how do we define regenerative agriculture, and we need a single standardized definition in order to make this work. And what I saw from an early moment is that regenerative agriculture is actually about regenerating living systems, and living systems do not do just a single thing. Living systems, ecosystems actually iterate, they prototype, they try thousands of things. A single tree will drop thousands, millions of seeds in order to have one seed that lands and sprouts and becomes a tree of mature size again. And so my thought and what I've advocated to the world is that we should not have a single standardized one attempt at a definition. Instead, we should let many approaches to regenerative agriculture sprout, as many approaches as there are farms and ecosystems and bioregions and businesses in the world. And yet we still need some way to come together. If we're going to meet our global targets of 1.5 degrees Celsius, regenerative agriculture has to expand significantly. It has to go from this very small percentage that it is on the planet right now in terms of acreage to, it's been estimated, up to 40% of global cropland by 2030. That's not that long from now, and so we have a huge amount of work to do. Doing this is a crucial step to future-proof agriculture and in the midst of these rising risks that we continue to see. But scaling in practice requires more than just commitment. And we have some great commitments that are out there by many companies. we actually need to come together on shared outcomes. And so instead of trying to get to a single definition, what I have recommended and what the folks at WBCSD, also OP2B many years ago, and the Sustainable Markets Initiative and others have said, let's rally around a set of outcomes and metrics that we can align to. If we can get to a simple core set, that will give freedom, that will allow farmers and organizations and enterprises around the world to innovate towards those outcomes. Stefania will tell a bit more of the story, but we have been able to, over the last 2 years and really stretching back about 5 or 6 years, bring a global community together to align on what are the outcomes we're aiming for with regenerative agriculture and how can we measure them, what are the metrics to track them every step along the way. This will enable, as we now have them in hand and are starting to put them into practice in our companies, as we'll hear from the great organizations who are on the webinar today, this will really enable comparable impact monitoring and reporting. It will very importantly enable finance and scaling more innovative finance to support regenerative agriculture to grow around the world and regenerative food systems. And it'll just help business decision making and cross-sectoral collaboration. So there's many good reasons that we need to come together around shared outcomes. And the folks on the call today are really going to give you a bit of a story of how we've gotten so far, but there's also a huge amount left to do. And the more than 400 organizations who signed up for today, we need your help to get there. Yesterday, there was a conference here in the Hudson River Valley in New York. It's called the Menus of Change Conference. It's run by the Culinary Institute of America. And they have a new president there. And this is the last little anecdote I'll offer before handing over to Stefania. The new president of the Culinary Institute is a guy named Michael Bacher. Michael spent more than a decade at Google, running the workplace programs and the food at Google. And so Google feeds over 1 million people a week around the world and have done a huge amount to push their food systems procurement work forward and their standards. And Michael Bacher has always been an incredibly innovative thinker. And so what he said to kick off the conference yesterday, I'm just going to paraphrase and offer to all of you who are on this call. He basically said, a lot of people spend a lot of time hoping and asking other folks to do things for them. They want somebody else to figure out the metrics or somebody else to make regenerative agriculture scale in their bioregion or in their company. And basically what he said was, don't ask anybody else to do anything. Don't wait for anybody else to do anything. It's you. You are the ones who are going to do it. And that is especially true on this call with many of the largest food companies in the world, many of the largest agriculture companies in the world. You are on this call today. The 400 people that signed up, the 250 people, all of you who are on right now listening to this, you are like an incredibly powerful group for changing the food system. Like what you do and how you take these metrics and put them into action, it will make a really significant impact in the world. So thank you for being here. And with that, Stefania, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks so much, Ethan, for this amazing introduction. A very warm welcome also from my side. I'm very excited to have this conversation with you all. As Ethan said, I'm part of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We are a community of businesses, over 200 leading companies, and we support them on their sustainability journey. And so when we're thinking about agriculture and food production, we're working towards a food production system that works with food security and food sovereignty, but also on a sustainable path, of course. Ethan, maybe before, because you gave such a good introduction on, and I just wanted to give a small anecdote on why I also believe this topic is so important, is that when we're thinking about other sectors, like the energy sector, I think we have a clear path, solutions path identified on how to develop a sustainable energy system. You know, renewable energy seems like a clear solution pathways that we have forward. And when we're looking at the food production, and especially on how we transform the way we produce agriculture, that this is where I think we're still trying to align and converge on the solutions, and hence all the conversations on should we define the solutions and agricultural models. But ultimately, what I think there is a real strong, and you will see growing consensus, that we definitely need to move from a very prescriptive practice-based agricultural models that we had at that time that was very stiff and maybe even sometimes in law towards a more results-based, or we can call it outcome-based agricultural model systems. And that's what we're all working on. And that's why there is so much momentum, and you will see growing momentum to align on. So what is a shared impact monitoring system that we should look like? What are the key environmental impacts that we want to measure at farm level, aggregate at supply shed or landscape level, and then report and disclose at corporate level? And this is the work that we have been driving for the last 2 years at the World Business Council, together with the frontrunner group of One Planet Business for Biodiversity. And so you'll see in the next slide, and Ethan, you said it very rightly so. Why do we need the alignment on why do we need to align on a shared impact monitoring format? Why do we need to align on the key environmental and socioeconomic outcomes that we want to measure? Is because everything underpins the valorization behind it is really linked to that. And this is also how the business case will also work. And this is why it is so important. And so it has, as you said so rightly so, Ethan, impacts on finance, on how we valorize the environmental impacts and co-benefits that are driven. It has impact on policies. How do we drive an enabling policy environment that allows for an outcome-based or results-based farm management models to arise? And then it allows to align also on the cost-sharing mechanisms that can be, or financing mechanisms that can be put in place to finance the transition. On the next slide, I'm very pleased to present to you some of the work. The first thing that I'm very, very excited to share is WBCSD and HowGood. We really played a role as a convener. So we did not reinvent the wheel. We did not invent any new key metrics. We just brought together our large group of companies, so over 52 companies directly engaged in this work for 2 years, and over 33 partners that actually represented 1,100 businesses. They all came also, and we jointly worked for 2 years to really drive convergence and alignment. So the process, just for you to understand, was how can we align on and drive convergence and vote actually on the key metrics where there is where there is the highest consensus. Yes, I really believe we're shifting from, like a shift is, we're shifting from individual company frameworks. They all have their agricultural frameworks and often their Region Act frameworks, to a shared impact monitoring system. That was really the shift that we hope to have contributed to convene. And this is why there was such a large group of actors. And we didn't put so many slides on it, but we have multiple tables that show and I'm just going to call out some, but that show, for example, the alignment across a side platform regenerative agriculture framework together with a textile exchange framework. And so that we have seen really strong alignment across individual companies, frameworks. And so just wanted to emphasize a little bit the process. But let's maybe move to the next slide, where there is a little bit the most exciting part, which is the results. So what did these companies for almost 2 years land on? And so as always, we're in a process of convergence. So they landed on 11 cross-sectoral outcomes that are aligned with planetary boundaries, with SDGs, and you will see also with voluntary and mandatory reporting frameworks. They aligned only on 10 core indicators. So also useful to mention that on the socioeconomic dimension, I think still more work needs to be done to really drive alignment. But as companies and partners voted for it, we only captured the one that have received a quorum. What is important, and Ethan was saying it very holistically, what do we mean by regenerative agriculture? What's so important about it? And you will see on the environmental outcomes where there is a lot of consensus. Well, probably one of the most important one is the focus on improving soil health as a very important impact area to mention, where there is strong consensus because it's also more mature, is all everything that is related to the climate metrics. How do we reduce and minimize greenhouse emission? How do I increase above and below the ground carbon sequestration? Other important dimension, of course, for agriculture is water. How do I improve water quality and so minimize water pollution? How do I improve water quantity, so the blue water withdrawal? And then last but not least, it's so important to align on what you can call biodiversity metrics, but which are so important metrics also linked to the production and natural pest control, the natural pest control and natural pollinators that we need So, for example, the importance of increasing the percentage of natural and semi-natural habitat in agricultural landscapes, which is so important. We have so much evidence and data that says that the famous hedges actually decrease pest control, like it protect from pest control, I think over 80%. The importance of crop diversity, of improving cultivated biodiversity, which is also so important for that. And of course, I was mentioning already the pollution ones. What is probably important that you keep in mind is we've been doing this work looking at the planetary boundaries at the SDGs, and you will see in the next slide, we've been mapping also the indicators that have been voted on and converged against voluntary and mandatory reporting frameworks. Don't get too overwhelmed here. I think what is important to hear and land is that we are more mature today on the climate dimension because it's the one that is also being monetized. But you can see that their map also across also the water, soil health and biodiversity dimension are starting to be mapped across voluntary and mandatory reporting frameworks. And this work has been done in December, so I know this is always changing, might even need more of an update. But in the next slide, what we also wanted to just give you as an outlook is that the work has been done very in depth together with many, many partners. So we had consulting companies, technical consulting companies that also supported the work. And you can hear, read about the trade-offs. So there is an invitation. Don't hesitate to download the 5 technical chapters that we developed on. So you will learn more about all the technical work and trade-offs that the companies went through it. And I will probably finish with a call to action. The first thing is, please do not reinvent the wheel. For 2 years, a very large number of ecosystem players aligned on and voted on where they feel there is the biggest convergence. Help us, because I think it's an ongoing journey, and join them in driving convergence on a shared impact monitoring framework that ultimately will will allow us to unlock and accelerate the transition. I'll stop here because I would love to hear from our speakers today and the businesses that are in the room, what they think about this work and why it's important for them. Over to you,
Thanks,
Ethan.
Stefania. Really great to hear the story. I encourage you all to download these documents. Each of them really shows the work. That's the other thing. There was a great degree of inclusivity and transparency as we went through this over the last 2 years. And you can really read through these documents. We have this, beautiful slide that is just the summary. Here are the 11 outcomes and 10 metrics that everyone agreed on at the end, over 1,000 companies. And if you look into each of these individual chapters that talk about from soil to water to biodiversity to carbon to social and economic indicators, you'll see many, many more that were considered and what sort of rose to the top. And so the invitation is really like, dig into these, but also let's get to work on those 10 so we can have comparability as we share throughout the supply system, the different foods and products all the way out to the end consumer. Thanks again, Stefania. We're going to head over into brief bits of conversation with each of our speakers. We really want to start upstream. We're going to focus on farmers first. And so I'm very glad to introduce Paul Scheetz, who's the Director of Climate Smart Ag Origination at ADM, one of the largest agricultural companies and largest traders in the world. And as we went through the process over the last couple of years, we heard from farmers. Many of the companies worked with their farmers to get input. And so, Paul, I want to ask to you, why is it important to have these shared metrics, these shared regenerative agriculture metrics that are relevant to farmers?
Yeah, thanks, Ethan. Myself and my team are a little bit more farmer facing, so I really, really appreciate the farmer facing question here in this forum, and also appreciate being invited. Any successful Regen Ag program, we talk a lot about methodologies, we talk a lot about outcomes. The most complicated part is engaging farmer in a different way than we have maybe the last several decades, the last 120 years in our case. So we always have a goal ultimately of engagement where you kind of get farmers' attention, point 1. Point 2, get farmers to adopt a practice, and then point 3, expanding. And ultimately, to run any successful program, there's always like 3 categories. 1 is as frictionless data collection as possible. 2, technical assistance support. 3, some sort of incentive. because usually there's a productivity or a cost concern associated with the practice. The first two buckets, the frictionless data collection and the technical assistance support for long-term success, ultimately, we don't want it to just be cutting a check. There's got to be advice, and there's got to be a component that allows for the farm to be self-sufficient with the practice, whether that's productivity, whether that's any of these shared metrics that we're ultimately talking about. But a lot of the early adopters will understand what the benefits are in these shared metrics, even if they don't necessarily know them using the exact metrics that we ultimately have discussed here on this call. But the middle movers are the ones that usually need a little bit more information, not only to engage or adopt for the first time, but long term to do it for multiple years, because they tend to be a little bit more skeptical. But we'll hear a lot of our early adopters. They'll make comments of, why did you plant a cover crop? And it isn't necessarily the metric of we see this much less soil erosion than our neighbors. They'll always give us like three examples. One is when I look at my field versus my neighbor's field. On windy days, I see that their soil is blowing into another field versus mine is maintained in my soil. In a wet day, I see that my neighbor's field is ponding versus my field that has better water filtration. And whenever I dig up my soil versus one that doesn't maybe have a cover crop or conservation tillage, I see more earthworms than I do in fields that ultimately aren't impacted. That's understood by early adopters who have taken a chance and understand, how these practices can offset either their productivity or their cost concern. But a lot of those middle movers that doesn't necessarily have a lot of faith, they're going to need a little bit more of those metrics. And that's why in any successful program, not only are you talking to farmers about successful execution, but you're also talking about successful results that happen afterwards as well, Ethan.
Thanks, Paul. Really appreciate that. I'd love to hear two things. One, kind of those set of 10 metrics, which ones are really relevant for your work? What kind of rises to the top? And then I also want to throw in a question based on some of what you were just saying. I loved your 3 points. You talked about the early adopters and the middle movers. Are we to the late adopters yet? Is that starting to happen in different bioregions in the world? Love to hear thoughts on both of those.
Couple of questions, so I'll try to attack them. You might have to remind me of the second one by the time I get done with the first one. But as far as the metrics that we specifically talked about, it's all about soil health specifically. 79% of the farmers that enroll in our program say that the reason that they enrolled in that program was specifically for soil health. A little bit of our role has been maybe a translator versus educator of, like, we talk a lot about carbon, we talk a lot about biodiversity. Farmers, when they invest in a piece of ground, they're investing it not necessarily for their generation or the next generation. It's for their kids' generation, which they know the most important piece of that asset ultimately is soil. So they're focused on things like soil erosion, soil fertility, soil organic matter specifically, and we see that on almost all of our programs. That was to answer question one, and then answer question two. Okay, are we getting to middle movers? This is where the nuance is. So I think we always categorize regen ag that has a lot of like sub buckets of practices or outcomes that we're specifically looking for, of which I think all are slightly different. So like conservation tillage and no-till. 1977, in the US, there was 330 million principal crops. In 1977, there was 2 million no-till acres. Fast forward to 2017, there's 102 million acre of no-till acres now. So now you're getting past middle movers when it comes to that specific practice. When you're talking about cover crops, prior to 2000, there was less than 1 million acres of those 310 million acres. Now there's roughly 17 million. I still think you're really in the early adopter section, maybe even like not even gotten very far in the early adopter section when it comes to that practice. A lot of fertilizer technology, it's pretty advanced. There's some sort of technology that's ultimately being used, but there's new biologicals. So I think when you ask that question specifically about regen ag, I think you can answer it 15 different ways, because I think practices are in different sets of their adoption. But ultimately, when it comes to the big three, if you were to look at conservation, tillage, cover crop adoption, or fertilizer efficiency, specifically, I'm going to speak in the US. I know this is a global call, but specifically in the US, and you look at the trends from 1977 to now, there has been a lot of improvement, all while doubling production in all your principal crops over that 40-year period too.
Incredible. Thank you, Paul. Really appreciate your perspective, making it relevant. I can even see when you're talking about farmers looking at the field versus my field, that really practical results, the link to soil health. So thank you so much for joining us and sharing your thoughts on that. I'm going to head over to Daniel Glas. Daniel Glas is the sustainability venture lead at Bayer. And Bayer does an incredible amount of work across the supply system, but really on that input side, supporting some of the farmers we were just hearing about from Paul. Daniel, I'd love to hear if you can describe a specific project that Bayer is working on where some of these regen ag metrics, outcomes-based metrics, have come into play.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ethan. Happy to. I first would like to link to what you said just a few minutes ago, how to operationalize Regen Ag and how to operationalize metrics. It needs to start with making it a success for the farmer. So the metric is not the first question, but how to make it a success for the farmer needs to be the first question. And there are different ways of achieving that. So building on that thought, maybe 2 use cases where we use metrics, because each use case, the metrics you choose are slightly different. The first one is really around a field level use case where we apply some of the metrics WBCSD and all of us have been developing are applying on the field. And as I just said, it started there in this specific example in rice in Asia, direct seeded rice. It started really with the question, how do we make this a success for the farmer? Meaning, how is it profitable for the farmer? But of course, as well, how does it contribute to environmental outcomes? And then the metrics are really only, and I don't want to downplay their role, but they're only a way of measuring the performance of the system, right? So they come in second. The question started here with the direct seeded rice example and how to build that system in a successful way for the farmer. So we measure there, of course, then profitability. We measure yield. In rice, very important methane reduction, so contributing to GHG emission reduction. Water, of course, plays a big role, but of course, as well, as per Paul's comment, as well, soil health is key. I think soil health, we can all agree, is fundamental in regenerative agriculture. And then as well, these metrics in this specific project in rice, which is as well indicated in your report, they help as well in other ways, because they help to speak the same language with other partners needed to pull off such a project in a successful manner, such as off-takers. And they were really critical in an element of this rice project, the off-takers, to make this project a success. They helped with the capability building of the farmers. But of course, as well, they helped with ensuring then that the farmers in this specific case received 20% more revenue by selling to the export market. So I think it was only possible to pull this off because we had already a standardized way of thinking about regenerative agriculture with these metrics you were referring to.
I love that. I love kind of tracking you were tracking the metrics there. There's the income to the farmers, and that's a financial metric that also translates down through the supply system. And then it was multiple of those metrics coming together: soil, water, and greenhouse gas emissions in this particular project, this rice project.
Correct.
Is there also an aspect of comparability between projects? Does having these sort of shared unified metrics for Regen Ag help you or help other folks compare amongst different investments and interventions around the world? And yeah, why does that matter?
Yeah, let me start with why does it matter, and I will start with a few obvious points, but I think they're important to stress. It matters for credibility. It matters for speaking the same language. I just mentioned that. But as well, we haven't talked about that. Using the same metrics enables you to identify the same hotspots and focus areas in order for us all to focus on in terms of, for instance, environmental improvements. I think this is incredibly important. It matters as well to avoid confusing messages. So some of the participants in this call might have a consumer-facing message. If you use different metrics, you might end up with different diverging messaging. That's, I think, is as well important. But you talked about input providers. It helps input providers such as Bayer as well. Because if we measure the same way and if we land at the same focus areas, then it helps us as well to translate that into our R&D efforts to better understand what do we need to do differently in order to contribute and enable these regenerative agriculture systems. And last note on your comparability component. There, I think I'd like as well to maybe give us some homework. So it is fantastic that we have now these metrics, but there are a lot of them, and that's for good reason. And as your report as well indicated, many of us don't use all of the metrics. So I think in order to strive for comparability across Bayer, but as well across the value chain. I think it's as well important to start thinking about which of ones are really key, which ones do we want to prioritize. I think a guiding question in prioritization is coming back to the farmer. What is meaningful for the farmer? What's feasible to implement for the farmer? I think that's another thing we should start thinking about.
Excellent. Wow. Thank you so much. I really, appreciate again us pulling our attention back to the farmers, some of which we have on the line here today. There's been some great questions coming in. I even see, I'm not really fully watching the chat, but people are asking questions. We'll pick up questions a little bit later after our next speaker. But also there's connections being made. I'm seeing people saying, hey, let's connect, let's work together, let's do this. So keep it going, meet each other in the chat, keep asking the good questions. Thank you, Daniel, for sharing your perspective. I really appreciate that point about avoiding confusion, right? We no longer should be having the conversation when you go to your supply system partners of, well, how are you talking about it? Which data are you using? We're heading towards using the same metrics. We have a set that 1,000 companies have already agreed to, and let's get more and more on board so that we can spend less time discussing, well, which one exactly we're going to do, and spend more time collaborating on reducing impact and heading towards net positive food systems. Thanks, Daniel. I'm going to introduce Rafael Elizondo from Ikea. Rafael is the global head of agriculture for Ikea. Ikea is, of course, a great place where you can get many different types of products. It's also a significantly scaled food company, which you may or may not realize. And so I've had the pleasure of working with Rafael for many years and seen as he's advanced and grown Ikea's approach to agriculture and regenerative agriculture. I'd love to hear, Rafael, how having a set of shared metrics facilitates collaboration on specific projects in your supply system with other partners. Over to you.
Thanks a lot, Ethan, and thank you for your leadership and Stefania's in bringing us together. I love this topic, and I want to start by giving a little bit of context. In IKEA, our vision is to create a better everyday life for the many people, meaning people with thinner wallets. So for us, providing affordable and well-designed furniture and textiles is very important. And as you also rightly said, we are a food company. Not many people think of it, but we serve 700 million meals every year. So we have, I used to say we have 3 hats. We have the food hat, we have the textile hat, and we have the bio-based hat, because we are transitioning towards more renewable feedstocks on the foam, on the candles, on glue, and many other applications. So for us, agriculture is essential. And we see agriculture not only as a way for us to reach our sustainability goals, but also a way for us to strengthen our business resilience. And we have started into this regenerative agriculture many years ago. You said it correctly. We've been in this journey for some years, learning, and what I take with me is that we have learned a lot by talking to farmers, whether it's cotton farmers or whether it's beef farmers or whether it's rapeseed or soybeans in many different parts of the world, big farmers or small farmers. And all of them are testing and learning on Regen Ag, and we learn from them. And when I bring business leaders to the farms, not one business leader comes back without the energy to say, yes, we need to do this. And how do we do it? And there are normally 3 questions that they give me, and it's, how do we put Regen Ag in our business plan and our business strategy? Number 1. Number 2, how do we explain this to our customers? And number 3, how much do we need to invest? So these are essentially the 3 questions that we are navigating around. And the work that you guys are doing and what we are presenting here, and amazing work from Stefania to create this harmony around metrics, I think it's a huge step.
Are there specific projects that you've sort of used these metrics for that have collaboration, yeah, with some of your external partners, or love to hear.
We are testing some of this in Brazil, in cotton. We're testing this in beef in the US. We have a couple of discussions in New Zealand for wool. And we are testing also something in Europe, some ideas as well. We are starting a few other conversations in coffee, but it's still a little bit early to say. I am not happy to say, but we are still in pilot paradise. I heard that term some time ago, but I think again that this is the work that will take us out of this pilot mode and into scaling up, because we, as I mentioned in the beginning, in order for Region Ag to be scaled up, it needs to be the new norm. It needs to be the new normal. And for this, otherwise it will remain a niche. And this is where the metrics come very important, because we need to calculate investments. We need to calculate return on investments. How much do we need to invest in the short term? And what would be the return of that investment in the long term? It's really like where we are right now. We're stuck between the 1 year, 2 year business plan and the 5 to 10 year strategic plan.
Right.
And the metrics are, for me, the bridge to move in that direction.
You've spoken a little bit, so many of the folks who are on the call today, many of you who are listening in, you are an individual. Maybe you have one person or two people, maybe you have three people if you're lucky inside your company that's working to move the world towards regenerative agriculture, regenerative food systems. Rafael, you spoke a little bit, you gave one example of sending some of your business leaders out to the farm. That can be incredibly powerful. How else have you built internal buy-in? How else have you kind of worked on communicating ROI? I'm sure it's still a work in process, but what advice would you give to the other folks who are here, so each of them as individuals can go back to their organizations and build the sort of consensus to move in this direction?
It's a great question. It's something in IKEA. It's a very big company. There is a lot of different stakeholders, and moving things and creating energy or creating traction in a topic takes a lot of stakeholder management. So we have been learning a lot from our peers working with forestry. We can say that they have a few years or many years ahead of us in terms of understanding the direction, the strategy, where they want to go. So we started also 1 year ago creating this same direction. We brought in external stakeholders, external partners. Stefania was one of those, to actually teach our top management in IKEA. So we spent full days together, and we are listening to farmers, we're listening to the World Business Council, we're listening to different stakeholders that know much more than we. We are only a retailer, so we are here mostly to learn from all these different partners. And it is working, because now the way that we speak in IKEA about agriculture at the top management level is starting to shift.
Very exciting. Thank you so much for sharing that, bringing the outside in, bringing the business leaders out to the farms. This is incredible. And I also just want to underline a point you made early on, that this is not just about the good that it's creating. It's not just about the farmers. It's not just about greenhouse gas emissions or biodiversity. There's actually something really important about business resilience. And about engaging in your supply system, connecting your business leaders, so they know what the realities are like on the ground, should build trust and long-term resilience, which you're going to need to continue creating your products, and everybody will. So I think that's a major shift, and if anything, a gift of the current disruption and uncertainty in the world, is that all of our organizations and companies are looking on and focusing on business resilience alongside the important environmental outcomes that we're working on. So thank you, Rafael, for sharing from IKEA's perspective. I'm going to open up and do a little bit of Q&A before handing back to Stefania at the end to actually announce a pretty exciting report that was launched recently, but we'll get to that in a minute. We have some great questions. I don't think there's any way we're going to get to all of them, but we're going to try. So Stefania, would you want us promoting these guides, the business guides for deeper regeneration, to our own communities?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, so definitely. These business guides, of course, are technical documents. So you'll need to want to learn the nitty-gritty about why companies prioritize these metrics over others, what were the trade-offs, but they're open source, freely to download. So please do use them. Don't hesitate to also come back with any feedback and challenges. We have worked, for example, with Wageningen University, especially on the soil health chapter, and with Quantis on the carbon side, and with the biodiversity consultancy also on the biodiversity metrics. So with real pleasure. And I was trying to find, because I saw a comment in the chat, which always passionates me, because we also need to align economic impacts and environmental ones. So what's the positive business case for transitioning? I was trying to find, we published some evidence, but there is much out there that there is a positive business case for farmers that are transitioning across different systems. So we have seen it, we have done it on arable crops. I'll paste it in the chat. I think there is a beautiful investment case just done by TechnoServe on coffee across 12 countries. Again, there is a positive business case that they see. Of course, there might be a transition dip in some crops, but not in all, and especially in context where there is also a need for an increased productivity. And so as also our colleague from ADM was saying, technical assistance is so important to support farmers, and in the context where there is a real need, you actually see a positive business case right from the start. In some other ones, there might be a dip. Awesome. But just wanted to underline there's no myth. We're talking about more resilient and more profitable agricultural farms.
Excellent. That's a great transition to this next question for Paul, which it came in as, what about the increased income for farmers as a critical indicator of the implementation of these regenerative outcomes? The question goes on to say, it's easy to see all this as something as farmers might adopt early or later, but getting paid for doing this is the most important indicator that we're moving in the right direction. Love to hear your thoughts and comments on that.
I would agree. Incentives were critical, especially when those three: engage, adopt, and expand. Like first is just catching producers' attention, to be honest with you, because they're so busy and there's a million things that they're worrying about every single year. So incentives were really critical. The productivity gains, like it is complex. Like most of the time, it takes multiple years of adopting a certain practice before you see any of those like direct gains, because it takes a while for soil organic matter to improve to a level that is ultimately going to lead to a more resilient soil as you move forward. And also you're still going to have instances, like I'll go back to cover crops and conservation tillage, where you could have wet springs that could lead to productivity concerns that you have in future years. So the one thing that I always say on agriculture practices versus like maybe forestry is like, it's an annual decision with annual costs that ultimately needs to be made and comes with annual risks as well. There was a question in the chat earlier about like increased productivity and what are we maybe missing on the messaging and how clear we can be with like shared outcomes of where maybe we're not seeing the adoption that we thought in the past. I think there's one critical thing that we're missing. I think it's the messenger. I don't think it's necessarily the message. Anytime we have farmer meetings, we'll have like an hour of a university partner, an hour of a technical assistance partner. ADM will talk for an hour as well. Then we'll have a farm panel talk about practices specifically from farmers. Those first 3 hours tend to be pretty quiet. There's not a lot of engagement. The second farmers are talking to farmers specifically about these practices, it gets pretty active. So I think that's one opportunity of ultimately not only talking about the shared metrics that we're talking about on these calls, but who's delivering the message is really critical as well.
Yeah, it seems like we got to switch the order of your days there. Get the farmers on first. A question for you, Daniel, is related to one that was just mentioned there. How many years do you expect it will take to see some of those measurable changes in soil organic carbon is one thing, but also some of the other metrics? And is there a way that we can assess if these changes are truly permanent, rather than if they just reverse if management practices are changed again.
I think the first comment I will make to that one is, even though you didn't ask it specifically, there will always be trade-offs. That's I think something really important, and that's an entirely different discussion, maybe for a different webinar, how to handle trade-offs. But it's important as well to keep that in mind. And then on your question, I think I will echo from our own data what Stefanie already said, and literature confirms that. 2 to 4 years, unfortunately, it takes time to build up sufficient data to see whether you have an actual improvement. Of course, in some metrics, such as water savings, with my DSR example, the rice example earlier, you will see faster whether something is happening or not. But specifically on soil health, or even we haven't talked about biodiversity-related metrics, it takes time. And that poses a challenge for us as a company, but as well for the work with the farmers, because you just have to build up that knowledge first. And last comment I want to make on that knowledge is, unfortunately, it's hyper-local. So even in corn United States, the answer in Illinois will be different as opposed to a different state. And that yet increases the complexity, because you have to put in a lot of work to generate a lot of data to then convince farmers to adopt the change.
Thank you. Yeah, and I would say I very much agree, and we've seen this globally as well. Hyper local, the approaches, the practices are going to change so much, which is why I've said for many years there's no such thing as a regenerative agriculture practice. There are agricultural practices, and they may have regenerative outcomes, and now we have a set of metrics to track our journey towards those regenerative outcomes. But the practices itself are going to be unique to each place, and there is some challenge in that, but there's also something incredible in that, because it makes the food from each place, it makes whether it's the wine, we all know it in wines and cheeses, that there's a terroir, that there's something from the place that has that flavor. But corn has that too, grain has that too, carrots has that too. And as we head further and further into this regenerative food system, we'll get to begin to taste it across everything. So thanks for that. Rafael, I want to get a question in for you. You can comment on that. And then also the question that came in is the ROI to drive that sort of scale, is it purely financial? Or are there other returns? Are there other forms of capital that are given weight when making investment decisions? So,
great question. Thank you. I just want to build on what Daniel was saying about we are learning in IKEA. We are very much fact-based, and we really want to go into the numbers and what things cost. And we have been learning a lot with some of our farmer partners that are implementing Regen Ag throughout many years and following up the numbers, the yields, the inputs, the outputs by the numbers, by the zeros and the commas. And the one thing we have learned is that all you need is 1 degree more, a little bit of less rain, 1 year to the next, and you can do everything the same, and the outputs are going to be all different. But we follow the same recipe, and again, a small change in the temperature will change everything. This is, like you said, Ethan, this is a living thing, and we need to understand this in a business. As a retailer, we have to admit this is a living thing. You cannot control it as you control a production line, a machine with a certain behavior. And that's the first thing we've learned. And again, I guess it builds also to the question about return on investment, because my peers in the business side, they are asking me, what am I paying for? And what will be the yields? And when I get my money back and all these things, and this is the conversation we're having. This is a living thing. It actually means this is the right kind of investments to do. They are uncertain in our ways of understanding investments, but they are not in any way wrong.
yeah, and I think that it's beautiful to hear you taking on and heading in this direction, even in uncertainty, which is what we all need to do right now. It seems that there's a significant global uncertainty economically, politically, in terms of the climate and the weather, and yet we need to be making decisions and heading in a positive direction. The hope is, and what we're starting to see and what you've heard from each of these speakers is using these metrics is a key way to sort of guide that and track and have comparability and be able to have conversations about them. It's a holistic set of metrics, and it's one that it sounds like is providing at least the engagement around a more holistic set of returns. There are so many good questions that have come in here that I think we're certainly not going to have enough time to address all of them, but we will work with the speakers who are on today, and we will actually generate responses to all of these questions and then put it out afterwards. We're also recording this webinar. The webinar will be available to all of you. It'll be emailed tomorrow. All the question answers maybe we won't get to tomorrow, but we will come back with a little paper that kind of responds to these excellent questions and gets input from our speakers. So thank you all for the questions. I am going to hand us back to Stefania for a moment, for a couple minutes, to talk about something really exciting that's just come out last week. So thanks again to our speakers, Paul, Daniel, Rafael from ADM, Bayer, and Ikea. Really appreciate your input and bringing us back to the farmer and the business resilience case. Really great to hear from you. Stefania, over to you to tell us about this new report.
Thanks so much, Ethan. I just wanted to say one quick reaction on the very exciting and engaging conversations we were having before, which was on, what's the investment case for value chain and for investing in regenerative agriculture. And I just wanted to keep out there that many companies have started already to the cost of inaction. And so what's the value of investing in value chain resilience? And I could go on and on and on, but I think we're starting to have emerging evidence there too on the ROI. And also linking a little bit to what Rafael was saying about, we are trying to move from individual companies' pilot phases to large-scale landscape approaches. And that's really what my team and we're working on, which really gets us very excited because agriculture is so fragmented. Not even single player like Ikea can invest in a full landscape restoration and regeneration. And that's why we need to pull in multiple players and buyers, like the ones that we have today in the call, like ADM, Bayer, and Ikea in a specific landscape. And that's the work that we're trying to convene and drive in specific geographies. That drives a lot of that really passionates me because it's geared towards impact. What I really am excited to share today is, as you said, as you've seen, is really comes back to the metric conversation. You've seen we aligned on a core set of metrics. We had over 1,100 companies aligned there. So, and today what we are releasing is probably a critical pulse check because we looked into 38 companies and how they're publicly disclosing this information. So I just want to caveat here. One thing is aligning, maybe even internally using these metrics, which in your procurement practices, in your how you are supporting your farmers, and the other thing is going all the way to reporting and disclosing on them. So it's very another step further ahead, and you will see on the next slide, you see some of the high level findings that we have in this report. We took a pool of 38 companies, and what we can tell, which goes in the right direction, is that we're seeing increased alignment. We're seeing an increased reporting also on it. So there is 80% of the companies who are reporting on the outcomes. On the 11 outcomes, across the 11 outcomes, 72% are also reporting and disclosing the indicators they're using, and then less, but it's also interesting, 24 are actually even disclosing the exact metrics. For me, this is just an indication that we are converging, and also we're seeing growing momentum on even being very transparent and disclosing about it. Of course, we're probably missing a pulse check on the adoption, who is actually adopting them and using them in their procurement practices and frameworks that we don't have yet. That would be a very heavy lift. We took the info that is openly disclosed, but I think it's important to have it in mind. And so very excited to share with you these results. I think we have already shared with you before in the chat the link. Don't hesitate to look at this. It's an important and transparent work done by my colleague Fiona that I want to thank, that is also here on the call for all the prep work she did for that. And maybe what's taking also a step back, what we're also doing is, because we're really, this year, we're really supporting companies on their implementation. So how can you adopt and implement these aligned metrics across your supply chain and your procurement systems? You will see we have also aligned on few user cases. What's important to know, and I was sharing it a little bit today, is, and Daniel was speaking about it too, is we're taking these 11 global aligned outcomes, and we're actually adapting them to specific contexts. So really look at what would it be to stress test them also. What would it look like for a cost-effective MRV approach to really measure them, and what are the ones that maybe we should prioritize. Land use metrics are missing in this list, and of course, when you're looking at contexts like Brazil, where we're doing this deep dive, land use is very important. So we have added a land use dimension. We're doing this also in Europe, where land use and deforestation is probably sometimes less material, so they're less done. But just showing out there, the first use case that we're doing is we're adapting these metrics to specific contexts and stress test them and prioritize them, as Daniel was mentioning. The second work that I think is very exciting that we're kickstarting is how can we build a shared language with impact investors and financial actors, so that also banks or insurance companies, as they're developing their products, are maybe can develop debt at a better rate, because at a better rate, so at a cheaper cost for farmers, because they are implementing these practices. We see some very encouraging examples there too. Rabobank, NatWest, Crédit Agricole, some in Europe, because I'm working mostly with them. So sorry if I'm missing some that are also on the other sides of the world are doing such a thing. And so there is definitely a shared framework, not only across value chain actors, but also with financial actors, that needs to be put in place. We're working with FAIR and UNEP-FI and Ceres and Climate Arc on this topic. So very excited. And I think I'll stop here because I'm looking at time. We have 2 more minutes, and I don't want to. I don't want to spend too much of our time. But thank you so much, Ethan, for hosting us. I think you can see from the chat that it was the right topic and angle, and thank you for bringing us all together.
Absolutely. Yeah, and thank you for this new report, and please download it and share this around, and have this be a first step in a larger work for your company. And also just to underline, don't make this the only thing that you do with the RegenAg metrics, and come and engage with all of us, with Stefania, with the companies that are both presenting today, but the many other companies. Again, 400 companies signed up. We had over almost 300 people come on the call today. Let's get together and keep working on this. There are a number of events coming up in the world. Some where this work has happened already are on the left, but we have a huge slew of events. There's Climate Week happening in London. There's the UN Food System Summit in Ethiopia. WBCSD will be at many of these. HowGood and Regen House, our events venue, will be hosting conversations. There's a big moment at Climate Week in New York City. The theme of all the events we're hosting this year is on financing regenerative food systems, and how do we take these metrics and put them into action. And then again, of course, it will be a major topic at the UN Climate COP30 in Belém, Brazil. So maybe a year out, we'll have another report, that from WBCSD that says how we're doing, how those numbers are going up, how many more folks are taking these metrics on and putting them into action. Thank you, everybody, for being here. We'll get you the recording tomorrow. Thanks again to Stefania from WBCSD and all of our speakers. It's been fun talking about operationalizing regenerative agriculture, and hope to see you again soon. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you, Ethan. Thanks, everyone.